What is the scariest noise you've ever heard? Recently, a woman was cut in half by an elevator, and there was one witness. She described the sound the woman made after, like a cry, but 1,000,000 times worse, and she said it would haunt her for the rest of her life. I was shot at once, and the sound of a bullet passing close by is pretty distinctive, but I didn't realize what had happened until later, so I wasn't actually frightened by it. The most terrified I've been from a sound was when I was working graveyard security at an old army fort converted into a school. Part of the job was to walk through the buildings every hour or so and check the doors that are supposed to be locked. During one check, I stopped midway to use the bathroom, and while I was washing my hands, I heard a sound part way between a moan and roar. That was exactly the sound you'd expect some shambling undead monstrosity to make, and it came from right outside the bathroom door. I stood there frozen in terror for a good 5 minutes, still holding a paper towel. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I turned the lights off to get accustomed to the dark, slowly opened the door, and sprinted for the exit. I didn't go in another building the rest of the night. 2 days later, I was back for a day shift on the weekend. I had some time to consider what had happened, so I went back to the same bathroom and flushed the toilet. A minute later, the old water pipes made the same noise again. I was working graveyard security. One of the buildings we had to walk through was a very old church. As I was approaching the doors to the sanctuary at about 3 a.m., I heard the sound of the organ playing haunting music. I stood on the other side of the door for a couple of seconds, minutes, and finally decided to just rush on through the door. Turns out my partner had snuck in earlier in the night and set up an electric keyboard to play creepy music on loop. One time at 3 a.m., my big dog let out a full-on wolf howl in a dark room. He was dreaming. I've never heard him howl before or since. It was a full volume, a roo about a foot from my face, while I was asleep. I seriously thought I was in mortal danger. I was walking my dog at about 4 a.m. a couple of years ago. I go to work before the crack of dawn and heard a coyote howl in my neighbor's backyard. Then another one answered it from the other side of the street. My dog literally stopped and shit in the middle of the street, then turned and headed back to the house. I almost shit too. Damn, that blew up. Thanks for the award. In my early 20s, I worked at a nuclear power plant in the laundry department, and there was an alarm for a nuclear event while I was on shift. All non-essential personnel had to take shelter in the on-site bunker and wait for hours. The speakers blared an alarm and notice inside and out of the complex. The notice was something akin to alert. Nuclear event in progress. Take your stations. Alert. Girl getting her hip popped back into place in the ER with no meds after being thrown 100 feet off a motorcycle. I will remember the scream forever. It seriously haunts me. When a fox screams, they sound just like a woman being brutally beaten to death. Imagine waking up to that right outside your window at 3 a.m. The roar of a tornado that was about 1/8 of a mile from me, combined with the sound of the emergency sirens and the fierce winds full of all kinds of debris. I tell you what. That sound is almost calming when you've been inside a tornado and can compare the sounds. I live on the edge of Tornado Alley. I've been as close as you're saying, and in my basements, it's horrible in the light but not nerve-wracking. You expect the howling rain wind sirens. You expect a crackle of the Weather Channel coming in and out before silence and dark. Then I was inside an EF2, I cannot imagine an EF5. There is the expected buildup of the above crackle, dark, crackle, silence, dark. But there comes another set of sounds when the tornado is approaching that was unfamiliar to my 23-year-old self and been through constant drills since childhood. It's that rush you hear when a big rig is coming up on your sedan on a 2-lane highway, but amplified by 1,000. And then there is a noise you can only place because of action movies. The sound of metal tearing apart and away from concrete. And then an earth-shattering thud. The rocks, the foundations of the house you're in as in literally fell from the couch thud. And then you know shit is fucked when your dog has decided that she's now going full exorcist and puking up in her crate behind you, but you're worried about your idiot cat that has decided that the house moving thud is the signal to run up the stairs and into the main house, so you run after him to look outside and dark flash something is wrong. And you realize the 50-foot tree that was outside that glass door is missing. And all you can say at the top step, look outside, holding onto the fuzzy idiot is oh my god. And you're not religious at all. The thunk of a car hitting my sister and the noise she made as she hit the pavement. Truly the most pants-shitting level of terror I've experienced, and that's a deep well to draw from. She survived after resuscitation. Don't drive drunk. My brother got hit by a college-aged girl when we were in high school. The sound kinda fucked up my friends and me for a while. He got nailed at like 35 miles per hour when we were crossing the street. He went first and the person using the turning lane didn't see him due to the other cars stopped at the light. My brother didn't get severely injured, but he got a good concussion and a gnarly case of road rash. Oh, and a broken foot from where it got run over by the front tire before the forward momentum sent him bouncing down the street. Someone moving downstairs when I knew for a fact no one else should be home. Ultimately more a sad story than a scary story, but when I was a teenager my parents went to visit family out of town and let me do my thing at home for a few days. Unfortunately my mom got a call that grandpa had died, so they returned early and in the middle of the night. But instead of calling ahead or ringing the doorbell and just waking me up they decided the best course of action would be to just let me have some sleep and then tell me in the morning. Needless to say I was almost scared to death when I got up in the morning and heard someone downstairs and the door opening and closing when I thought I was home alone. My friend's mom wailing at his funeral. She aged 20 years in 3 days. I used to volunteer in a NICU with preemie babies. Great job, it was a fairly small hospital with a bigger, more advanced one nearby, so our babies were rarely in much danger. They just couldn't quite go home yet. Maybe my second week volunteering, I saw one of the visitor rooms open and heard this wail from a mother whose twins had just passed in her arms. The scream of a parent losing a child is such a primal, haunting sound like absolutely nothing I've ever heard before. This was maybe a decade ago, but I can still hear it like it was yesterday. Exploding head syndrome. Individuals with exploding head syndrome hear or experience loud imagined noises as they are falling asleep or waking up, have a strong, often frightened emotional reaction to the sound, and do not report significant pain. Around 10% of people also experience visual disturbances like perceiving visual static, lightning, or flashes of light. Some people may also experience heat, strange feelings in their torso, or a feeling of electrical tinglings that ascends to the head before the auditory hallucinations occur. With the heightened arousal, people experience distress, confusion, myoclonic jerks, tachycardia, sweating, and the sensation that feels as if they have stopped breathing and have to make a deliberate effort to breathe again. Missile inbound? Yeah, what a lovely message to wake up to. Cat starting to vomit on a new sofa at 3 a.m. My friend was fatally shot in the chest when we were leaving a club together in 2016. We were drunk and didn't really realize what happened, but when the reality of the situation set in, the look of fear in her eyes is an image I'll never be able to forget. She started frantically grabbing at her heart and crying, "I don't want to die," in between gurgled breaths. Moments before she passed she started convulsing and making these primordial sounding squelching noises that haunt me in my sleep to this day. She was 21. I miss her every day. Dropping the toilet seat at 3 a.m. My grandmother had an epileptic seizure, and in the 2 seconds leading up to her collapsing she screamed. It was a scream that sounded like she'd just witnessed the most horrible thing in the world. I've forgotten exactly why she screamed, but a doctor said it was just like an involuntary reaction. Still scary as hell. Lightning struck a tree behind my house. I was by a window on the side of the house facing it, and it sounded like a huge bomb went off. Knocked stuff off shelves and scared the hell out of the cats. I was shaking from adrenaline for a long while after that. I rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere outside of Breckenridge. It was about a 30-minute drive into town, so it was not close to anything really. On our last night, starting at about 2 a.m. there was a consistent, very loud bang that I can only imagine was a gunshot that sounded like it was directly outside the house. Not like someone hunting in the distance, but someone shooting very, very close. The scary part was the direction the sound came from, and distance would rotate and seem to change distance that someone on foot couldn't do. It usually takes a lot for me to get spooked, but I was fucking terrified. If something were to happen where I was, that would be it. It continued on until early morning and I got no sleep. I checked the property for footprints the next day, and there was nothing. To this day, the only logical explanation I can think of was that it was gunshots very far away, but because of the acoustics of the mountain and valley, it just seemed close. No idea what it was though, but I'll remember it forever. The buck roar. It rarely happens, but when a mature buck gets extremely, and I mean extremely, pissed off and territorial, they will sometimes let out a literal roar growl that sounds straight up demonic. I've only ever heard it once, and I damn near shit myself. I took my daughter to a park that has some hiking trails, and at the end was going to let her play on the playground equipment. As we are finishing on the final mile-long trail, I kept hearing noises of some kids throwing rocks into a dry creek bed, but didn't see them. As we came to an incline with some exposed roots, I asked her to hold my hand to help give her some stability. Just as she moved forward and grabbed my hand, I heard the sound of a rock hitting the trail about 2 feet behind us, and as I looked back, saw what was probably a 5 or 6 pound rock bounding into the brush to the right of us. I looked up to make sure nothing else was coming and sped up. I yelled something along the lines of whatever stupid fucks were throwing rocks, they were landing on a trail, and nearly hit someone. Had the rock hit my daughter or myself in the head, it would have killed her, and either killed or really hurt me, and then my 3-year-old would be alone hoping someone else came along on the trail. Once we got to the playground at the end of the trail, I called the rangers and told them what happened. Within 5 minutes of me calling, a ranger was at the 2 entrances exits to the trail. Once I was leaving my friend's house after a big barbecue party, backing up my car very slowly, keeping a close eye on all the children running around the yard. My husband, who had arrived in a different vehicle and so wasn't in the car with me, thought it would be funny to walk up the side window and slap the glass. I was looking over my shoulder at that moment and didn't see him coming. For one horrible second I thought the noise of the slap was the sound of me running over a toddler. I slammed on the brake and started screaming before I realized what had happened. The terror was so strong that even though it only lasted a second, I couldn't stop crying for like 10 minutes. My husband felt real bad. My mother calling me by my full name from the other room. The last breath of a human being. We were on a walking path and this guy passed us on a bicycle, but he looked pretty exhausted from the heat. 20 feet ahead of us he fell over and we ran to help him up. He was unconscious and just gave out this one big last shudder and stopped breathing. That was probably 40 years ago, but it still haunts me. It was the epitome of casting off this mortal coil. My own face being beaten in by a home invasion robbery with the butt end of a gun. I woke up to being beat almost to death, it was so loud in my head. I heard an Iraqi when I was deployed to Iraq in 2009 get electrocuted to death working on a power pole when I was on gate guard one night. It sounded like a lightsaber. I'll never forget that noise. You'd think one of those instances would be the most scared I've ever woken up, but you'd be wrong. That dubious honor goes to my wife farting loud enough to make the dog bark about 2 weeks ago at 3 a.m. I was at the Belmont Avenue L stop in Chicago, waiting for my train to go to work. On the opposite platform, a very drunk man, what used to be called a wino, fell onto the tracks. Several people on the platform reached out to him, trying to pull him back up. Every time the drunk man tried to stand up, he fell right down again. The people on the platform couldn't reach him. My own train arrived and I boarded, then continued watching this drama unfold through my window. Suddenly the commuters on the opposite platform started screaming, louder than I've ever heard anyone scream before. The sound was horrible. I could feel it in my chest and in my stomach. People were frantically pointing, and I turned to see what they were pointing at. Just then a train barreled into my field of view. The drunk man hadn't been pulled up yet, and I realized that there wasn't enough time left. The train was traveling too fast. One of the would-be rescuers was leaning quite far over the edge of the platform, with his upper body directly in the path of the oncoming train. They say that you never know how you're going to react to a situation until you actually experience it. I wouldn't have thought I would react this way, but my hands, almost as if they were acting on their own, raised up and covered my eyes. I didn't want to see whatever carnage was about to take place. I didn't want those memories to exist in my head. After a few seconds I heard the sound of the other train screeching to a halt. I lowered my hands. Through the windows of the other train I could see that the drunk man was now standing on the platform, unharmed. During those brief seconds when my eyes had been closed, the people had succeeded in pulling him to safety. Everybody lived. Hands down the sound of a dying rabbit. Tell us what the scariest noise you've ever heard was. Please share this video with others who are interested in scary noise stories. Drop a comment, click like and subscribe to be notified when I post a new video. Stay awesome.